A lot of people are complaining about Marvel Rivals that it runs like very terribly. So when I saw all these comments and all, I was kind of even thinking first that maybe these people that are complaining are just using a potato PC. That's why they are complaining that the game doesn't run well, when in reality they just don't have the right specifications. But when I saw someone on Reddit who said that they can run Cyberpunk on their PC but they cannot run Marvel Rivals, yeah, I knew NetEase definitely did do something wrong. Because if a PC can run Cyberpunk that is basically the perfect model of what it's like to make a bad optimized game, then yeah, Marvel Rivals is definitely not the most optimized game. So I decided to go digging into the evidences, and eventually when I dig deeper, I saw that the devs were actually not lazy at all, because this game was made with Unreal Engine, and the lead technical developer released an article with Unreal Engine stating how they made the games and the challenges that they faced and all those things. And during the course of development, they had to switch game engines and remake parts of the entire game almost 4 years into production just to optimize the game. What the heck? So during the course of my research, here are 3 things that they did to even make the game somewhat playable. The first is destructible environment, and I know that this doesn't seem like a big deal. It's not just destructible environment. We've seen destructible environment in thousands of games. What really makes this one special? But in reality, destructible environment is a real performance problem, because if you really think about it, you have like thousands of particles with colliders, with physics colliders just flying around, and the computer has to calculate where all these particles need to go and how they interact with each other. And in Marvel Rivals, they even have a unique destruction effect that based on the character ability, the character that you're using, the destruction effect is going to be different. So this is definitely not easy computing at all. So to make it somewhat playable, they used a 2-tier destruction system. First, they used a large scale destruction system. This basically breaks walls into big chunks based on the player's ability. So think of this like the first initial curve or pattern of the destruction. After doing this, they use a small scale destruction system, and this is actually where the real magic happens, because instead of breaking those large chunks into thousands of debris and all those things, they just fake it and use a fake particle system. These particles looks like debris, but in reality they're just pre-made animations with smoke to just make it look more destructive than it actually is. So basically, there's no physics involved, there's no colliders, it's basically just vibes. So yeah, and this really works very well because they can use low poly models or sometimes even just images to create these predefined animations. So it's just all for show, but it's very efficient. The second thing they did is Doctor Strange Portal. And yes, I also know that many people on Reddit have been complaining about Doctor Strange Portal, that it's just awful to have a Doctor Strange on your team unless your FPS is just going to sink into the drain. But even though that may be true, they actually still put a lot of effort into optimizing Doctor Strange Portal, because if you think about it really deeply, even though sure we've had other Portal games since 2007, so you can just be like, what's so special about this? This 2025, we can definitely make a Portal game. But if you really look deep into it, you realize that in the past, video game graphics and expectations were not as high as this, and over the years video game graphics have really like skyrocketed. And we know that the way Portal works basically is that you are rendering an entire new scene inside this tiny box. So that's not good at all for performance. So the way they were able to even make it somewhat playable, they built a custom system from scratch, because before that they were using Unreal Engine scene capture, which had many problems. First, it was made by Unreal Engine, so they didn't have full control of how the thing should work. It rendered a second full scene, which is too heavy on the CPU and computation in general. It uses serial computing, which basically means that it performs one task at a time, and this caused a lot of CPU bottleneck, because the GPU had to be just basically waiting for the CPU to be done and give it a task to do, making it just slow and redundant. So they made their own system called multi-viewport split screen, and it's a way faster way, because instead of rendering an entire new scene, it uses another viewport to capture different locations of the same scene. Think of it like, instead of having two separate scenes, we can have two different cameras. So one camera for the main character and another camera for the portal, for where the portal is placed. But at the end of the day, it's still one scene that these two different cameras are streaming. So just think of it like different camera angles rather than two different scenes entirely. This is awesome because it uses CPU parallelization rather than serial computing. Basically, in CPU parallelization, the CPU can work on multiple tasks at the same time rather than doing everything one by one. So instead of the CPU rendering the main character first, then it now go to the second camera to render, the CPU can just work on both of them at the same time and delegate tasks quickly to the GPU, so that the GPU doesn't just stay left out waiting for the CPU to tell it what to do. So all these combined together, LOD, that's levels of details, CPU parallelization, G-buffer, dynamic resolution scaling, all these come together to make Doctor Strange Portal actually playable. I'm not saying it's the best, but at least they tried. And it's very crazy how much work goes into something that looks so small to be playable, but actually very huge in the development side. The third thing they did is lighting optimization. Now, I would say, in my opinion, that lighting in games is usually underrated, except if it's like ray tracing. Yes, I know if it's ray tracing, everybody is talking about it, ray tracing, thousands of light and all those things. But even stuff like global illumination and just normal generic lighting is still somewhat of a huge deal, because if you really think about it, you are exploring this map, this huge map, and the computer has to simulate lighting realistic enough with shadows and highlights constantly every single time. Like, we're talking like one calculation every 0.01667 seconds for just 60 FPS. To put this into more perspective, that's 216,000 lighting calculations per hour. Yeah, and some scenes have hundreds, sometimes even thousands of light source, because you can't just really have one light source, because it will be either too dark with many shadows or too bright with basically no shadows, making it just look like a washed out flat 2D image. So even lighting is an artistic tool in game development that needs a good amount of optimization, just the same as making the player models. So what Marvel Rivals did is that they used light mask boxes. these boxes restrict lighting calculations to like a specific zone. This is great because it will reduce light overlaps and save processing power where the computer is calculating lighting for a location that the player cannot even see. Just as you can see in this their demo, the computer doesn't need to calculate the lighting that is on the second floor of this building for the road. Like, that's just unnecessary since it's basically invisible in that area. But if we didn't have these light boxes, the computer will still be calculating the light that is from the second floor of the building on the road, and that's just totally unnecessary and a waste of resources. So these are the 3 interesting optimization tricks that NetEase used to make Marvel Rivals somewhat playable. But I guess at the end of the day, people are still complaining that the game runs terrible, so I guess maybe much work still needs to be done.